Hello, and welcome to Movie or Something, a guided tour through the high points of film history. My name is Shintaro Koda.
And I'm LEAH LUKSETICH, host of the pop culture recap show Culture Crusade. I'm excited to be here.
To begin, I would like to pose a question. War. What is it good for? A time-honored query without question. Many of you have probably heard it before. But what if we asked the same of another human pastime that defies apparent meaning? Say, theater. Theater, what is it good for? Now consider that the terms theater and war share a real association, as the term theater of war has been in common use for centuries now to describe any specific location in which a military event takes place. War is always a kind of performance. In the theater of war, there are stages of combat, in which drama is incited by acts of war, committed by power players, who act at once and recite scripted speeches, until finally the curtain falls.
Although I myself consider theater to be a powerful art form with great potential, you make a good point. The film certainly presents war as a kind of performance, one devoid of any real purpose or meaning.
Re-enactor is a war film unafraid of artifice, bucking many of the trends of its genre, and mocking other directors' foolhardy attempts to tell inalienable truths, thereby revealing the ultimate truth that film is, by its very nature, a medium reliant on imagination and construction.
To that, I would briefly add that the fact that the film's title breaks the fourth wall by stating that this is a group of people putting on a reenactment adds to the commentary about war's performance.
What assists the film most in distinguishing itself from other war pictures is the way Shapiro uses levity to make a pacifist argument. The appeal of Re-enactor is best expressed in the following shot that appears towards the end of the film. That one brief visual gag is an exemplary instance of how the film uses comedy vignettes to subvert the audience's perceptions of on-screen military action. But more on that later.
That is an excellent observation, Shintaro. There's another filmmaking technique that Shapiro uses in Re-enactor to enhance his message, specifically the cutaway. The shots of various statues placed throughout the film seem to be drawing a comparison between these statues and the battle being reenacted. Both are ways in which we as a society seek to memorialize and honor our history. I find it particularly fascinating to look at this film in light of recent cultural conversations surrounding Confederate statues. What aspects of history should be memorialized and which should be condemned? And when does remembrance become celebration? I think Shapiro would say that war is certainly not something to be honored or romanticized.
This irreverent attitude championed by Re-enactor is unquestionably the best tack that Shapiro could have taken with the material, as any glorification of the Confederacy or the ennobling of their 1862 defeat at Malvern Hill would be done in bad faith, so he smartly takes the exact opposite position without directly referencing the victory of the Union. Instead, he exploits the snow-capped statues of Richmond, Virginia as symbols that cannot be separated from their context.
I think that's an extremely important thing to point out. When you separate something from its context, you take away its original meaning. When you do that, you risk misinterpreting it.
Plenty of controversy surrounds the issue of Confederate statues in the United States, and there is not nearly enough time in this essay to discuss all the ins and outs of the topic, but discussing the film without mentioning the presence of the statues would be doing it a disservice. Their role as memorial objects develops the film's theme of war being perceived as an outdated idea.
I also think the inclusion of the statues with the battle scenes really cements the idea that America as a country tends to glorify armed conflict to an insane degree. It's kind of ridiculous, even if there is a tremendous amount of bravery and sacrifice involved.
The juxtaposition of the statues with the disorganized actions of the Confederate reenactors is a strong example of the film's propensity for showing the Civil War as a series of absurd encounters.
Both are visual reminders of the war that came loaded with the baggage of toxic backwards ideology, and each make a point of showing how the other does not really apply to the world of contemporary political discourse. It really is a brilliant choice on Shapiro's part.
One is immutably stiff and literally and figuratively stuck in the past, and the other relies on the confluence of spontaneity and choreography, voluntarily evoking the aesthetics of the past, but both reveal a misdirected reverence for a failed system of belief and the war that allowed for the escalation education and continual exposure of such moral failures.
The figurative stiffness of the reenactors and the literal stiffness of the statues reminds me of the meticulous historical record-keeping you might find in a history textbook.
That is the keystone of Shapiro's comic sensibilities, that playful approach to refuting the empiricism of historical account. To return to that uproarious parking lot shot, it generates inquiry pertaining to the plasticity of the film's temporal dimensions. Which of the elements feels more out of place? The full parking lot relative to the 19th century outfits of the soldiers, or vice versa?
That plasticity really helps the film stand the test of time. This film really made me consider how we think about history. It really is a collective effort. It's interesting that the film never really focuses in on anyone in particular. We're observing the group as a whole. It kind of represents how most people don't really question the history we're taught in school. We just go with the group.
That same thoughtlessness is evinced most obviously in the film's most extensive excursion into the world of post-production effects, barring the disarmingly charming stop-motion editing in the title sequence. The overcranked sequence of soldiers loading a cannon is beholden to the black and white films of the first half of the 20th century that implemented similar techniques for comic effect, rendering human figures as jittery mechanized ones, making actors automata.
That sequence with the cannon really stood out to me as well. Again, that mechanization really highlights the film's themes.
It also leads us to think of Shapiro as a proponent of psychological constructivism. The constructivist mental model proposes that the human mind imbues stimuli with relevance and organizable characteristics to develop cognitive systems that arrange thoughts into patterns and sequences that take the form of malleable personal philosophies, which translate into habitual behaviors. Psychological constructivism thusly links conceptually to this idea of the comic character doomed to fall into inevitable patterns of misfortune and repeat them mindlessly. As a metaphor for war, this appropriately services the director's primary thematic concern.
I absolutely agree. Shapiro's decision to tell the story of the Confederate Army's defeat at the Battle of Malvern Hill as a series of disjointed displays of gross incompetence using the lens of arch-comic absurdism is a particularly astute one, considering the harrowing subject matter being handled.
The unsmiling, labored march that closes the film provokes a final line of questioning. What does it even mean to be a reenactor? What is the line between reenacting something and imitating it? Is imitation itself a form of flattery? Or is this really as on a case-by-case basis as others claim it is? The answers are up for debate, and that Re-enactor inspires this dialogue is proof of its power as a political film, and on the whole, one of the most creative critiques of war and war films ever made.
I want to leave the audience with this question. Why do we record and remember history? For some, it's just really fascinating to know how we got where we are today. For the rest of us, the answer is equally as simple: to learn from past mistakes. If we can't do that, history truly is doomed to repeat itself.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Leah, where can people watch your show?
They can head over to my channel, which we can link in the description, or just search for Culture Crusade to find lots of pop culture goodness.
As always, please forget to subscribe.
Have a great day.